So, who's excited to talk about DAO and decentralization today? It's a full room, passionate as always, passionate as we are. We have some really hot topics today, and honestly, I believe it's honestly the topics which are kind of hot in the space right now: governance, DAO, evaluation of ICOs. I mean, especially in this kind of bear market. Even we have so many people approaching us with their pitch decks, and you look at it and where's the business case and why I don't understand it? Read the words, but I don't know what they mean. So there's a lot of need in the market, and we are very happy to have a big expert here, Martin, in the room. And he's giving us a little input today, like 10 minutes. We don't want to bore you with any too many slides and too many presentations. And then we're going to turn this into a discussion. And I mean, of course, for us as Dash Embassy here in Thailand, again, we always want to connect back to Dash, back to the community. And of course, in Dash, we have the same issues, basically. We have a running DAO, we have an awesome system, but we have a lot of proposals, and we ask ourselves, like, what is the criteria for a good proposal versus a bad proposal? And I mean, there is not really a scheme where you can take, okay, I take the scheme, I take the proposal, and now I match these things together. So at the end of the day, it boils down to different opinions, different people reading proposals. And I mean, you read one proposal, or 100 people read one proposal, so they're going to have 150 opinions about it. And we try to make it more objective, and that's what we talk about here today. Martin, your stage.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Do we have a clicker? This one?
Yeah, we.
Yeah. Microphone is working. Okay.
It's not on. Just start. Just start.
Okay. Good. Hi everybody, my name is Martin. I don't talk too much about me, more about the topic. Just very quickly, I basically started my entrepreneurial ventures in Shanghai. Lived there for 13 years. Mainly had ventures in advertising media area. Then I moved 2015 to Berlin and got there pretty much involved in the center of all things blockchain. The things that interest me most are basically everything around DAOs, community governance, and then obviously rating. So rating is what we're diving in today a little bit. As Felix already said, I don't want to make it too boring, so I just start a little bit with a couple of slides to get the ideas rolling, and then later we talk about it a bit more in depth and see what we maybe can do for Dash on that end. So how do we know rating so far? All of you probably know the nice Amazon star rating, right? So that is actually already relatively distributed. It's centralized because there's a centralized Amazon behind it, but it's peer-to-peer reviews that basically go from user to user. Problem there is, we all know you can buy these kind of reviews online, and there are like bots and large BPO companies in the Philippines that give you a lot of stars if you need them for money. And the other problem is that the signal is relatively noisy, meaning if I would ask all of you guys here to evaluate an ICO, for example, then we have like so many opinions about so many different ICOs, and nobody would actually be really able to come out with an outcome that we actually really want to know there. In the financial market, we got these, big centralized rating agencies. So they solve that centralized. Whether they solve it or not is still a question. We have seen in 2008 and 2009 that it didn't really work, or that there are still a lot of problems in the system where stuff was rated pretty well that actually in the end exploded and destroyed a whole lot of world market cap. The problem there is it's expensive to rent this. One of these companies, basically, if you have your financial product rated, costs like $300,000 or something, and it always being paid by the customer. So I want to have my financial product being rated, then I have to pay this $300,000, which in my opinion is a giant conflict of interest, right? If you take the money from where you actually should be rating about. So that is a giant problem in the existing financial rating systems. So what do we have on decentralized side? We have things like, for example, Gnosis, you heard about, Wings AI maybe, the one or the other. So these are prediction markets where we basically stake for a certain outcome, and in this way we predict how much, for example, how much market cap will project XYZ have in 1 year or something like that, right? Problem with that is that it's it needs liquidity. So the point is you have you need to have somebody betting positive for a market in order to bet something negative against it. So meaning basically what, for example, Wings AI does, they're totally decentralized. It's a DAO. It runs on Ethereum. It's a beautiful, by the book blockchain project. But what they do is basically they go to the ICOs, or the ICOs come to them, and they say like, okay, we take 2%, 3% or what of our tokens that we push out in the token sale, and we push them to fund the prediction market here. And then everybody who bets on the prediction market can basically win this money that's in the pot, right? So that's how the prediction market works. So it will not work for an ICO project that does not want to fund the market, right? So actually a little bit sad, Wings AI is there, I think a lot more, like at least 6 months, probably longer, and they have only 12 projects on the platform over this time. So it's a little of a problem there as well. Another problem is that you can only have one market, one prediction market for one evaluation. So if you in a startup, you want to know like how is the team, how is the token economics, how is the MVP, how is so many questions. And for each of these little questions, you basically have to open one market, which makes the usability a little bit difficult. Another option would be peer-to-peer rating. This is actually out of a concept that I've written about half a year ago called block rate. What we do there is we basically build a marketplace, and within the marketplace the raters can sell the rates directly to the investors. And the good thing in that is that there's no ICO involvement. So we can talk about an ICO without actually even ask the ICO or have the ICO paying anything or being anyhow involved. So it's like, it's really nice detached, so there's no conflict of interest. The problem with that is that the investor is obviously going to pay for the raters rating the projects, and we are still competing with an existing market where obviously there are a lot of free websites outside, ICO Bench and stuff alike that offer services for free for the user, right? So so you have to have an added value in that kind of system that is good enough for the investors to actually say like, okay, I want to spend money on my rates. The last thing I want to talk about is DAO rating. So can we use a DAO to actually do rating? And how that roughly would work is, you all know the Dash DAO pretty well, I assume, right? Is there anybody who doesn't know how the Dash DAO works? Everybody knows. Good. So, yeah. Okay, so Dash DAO works basically the way that we have a list of proposals that are proposals for the DAO to be approved, and then masternodes who have staked money, so they're kind of like involved in the Dash ecosystem quite heavily. They will then vote on the approval of these proposals. And if it then approves, then the proposal comes into place, and whatever the proposal is will be made real. So a little bit similar, it would work here as well, just that the list of proposal would be basically a list of ICOs, of projects, of crypto projects that should be rated. And then the people can vote for this is a good project or this is a bad project. So what in Dash goes from the proposal list into the DAO when it gets approved is here it goes on a list of good ICOs, right? So if enough people say yes, then it comes on the list, and then in the end we have a list of like all the good ICOs. So this is kind of like a recommendation list for people who wants to invest in ICOs. And then you could potentially have sub-DAOs of that DAO. They would look into like all these little details. So you would have one DAO that just looks at team, one DAO that just looks at token economics, and so on. Now, then you could go and you can say like, okay, a DAO can fork. So maybe some people don't like that list how it is because their way of investment is maybe a different way. They maybe don't like coins that you want to flip and then right after they hit an exchange you want to sell it. Maybe you would rather look into a DAO that actually looks into investments for 3-5 years or something, right? So then there could be splits of DAOs that could all have their own personality more or less, and then they would all have a list of projects. The tricky thing in building that is how do you choose the members who can vote on what gets on the list and what not. In Dash, it's solved the way that only masternodes can vote, and masternodes stake 1,000 Dash, which is a significant amount of money, even today. And basically, with that, you kind of like ensure that always, it would be handled in the best interest of the system. Now, if you build a DAO for an ICO rating, you have basically two choices of going. You can go with the plutocracy, which basically means like one token, one vote, right? So you make an ICO or something, you push out a lot of tokens of your DAO, your rating DAO tokens, and then you would people could buy this DAO. They can basically they can buy the token, and then they can vote with how many tokens they have. That has a problem because if your rating DAO market value is not very high, let's say it's just I don't know, 10 million or 5 million US dollar market cap, then people could come and they could buy tokens for like what, $500,000 or something, and they can totally, vote for whatever they want inside your system, and that makes it not very resilient. If you have a very high market cap, that gets a little bit better, but it's still tricky because there's always a bigger fish in the ocean, right? Now, the alternative is you go with reputation. So you don't do a coin. You basically say like, okay, our DAO users can earn reputation inside the system by doing good things for the system. And the more reputation they have, the more they can vote for these things. So, or you could basically say like, okay, if that vote that he made was a good one, then he earns a little bit of reputation, and then over time he can gain reputation and then can has more and more voting power. power. So in that way, we would have a very nice curation, but obviously it's not as open, right? Here it's only basically people in the DAO that that are kind of like selected people more or less, right? And this one would be a system that would be open for anyone. Yeah, and with that, that's from my side. We can move into a discussion.
Thanks a lot, Martin. I think that was quite awesome. Anyone has already questions? Anybody already has questions to what Martin said directly? Go ahead.
Yes, one of the last things you said was you would base the voting power on good decisions and on good votes that somebody makes. That's a vote within the DAO, right? And how is good or bad determined in that system?
That depends on your system. It really depends on what your DAO is supposed to be. Like, for example, you could have a metric in an ICO rating DAO. You could have a metric like after the ICO was concluded, you can see like how big was the market cap, or what did they reach, or did they reach the soft cap, or whatever kind of like benchmark that you set, and then you can basically measure the voters on that.
And you would do so automatically?
You could do that with a smart contract, yeah. It's not necessary to do that way. You could also do it the way that you say like, okay, the governance of the DAO can basically give reputation to people. So then that means that the DAO as itself can vote like, okay, I like you as a rater, so I want to have you in our rating community, so I give you reputation.
And that would be a collective decision.
That would be a collective decision, because everybody who is already in the DAO would say like yes or no to you. So that is a different way. There's a lot of different ways how you can approach this problem, but that would be like two of the options.
All right, anyone else?
So like at the start of the DAO, is there a charter, something that dictates the direction of the strategy? Who comes up with that, and how is that coming into play?
Very nice question, yeah, very tricky question. So obviously there is always two levels, right? I mean, in governance is basically all about two questions. One is like, who can make what decision? And the second question is, who can change who can make what decision? So these two questions is what you need to answer basically. So if you answer the second question, you answer how you want to start your DAO, right? So you always need to have that rule-making decision body, and you can have that in the DAO as well, but you can also have that centralized, because you can say, for example, a centralized community or even one person could basically start a DAO by writing the contract, pushing it out there, and then people could just buy in if we go proof of pricing work, or win reputation if it's another way.
Yeah, I would add to that point that, I mean, honestly, every time we set up this meeting, we have these discussions, pre-discussions on the telephone, and Martin and me were like already 1 hour talking, and I think the next time we should already record the pre-talk, because these are always like the questions we raised already, and it's like super interesting. I mean, I would add to that yes, there's like we have this concept of a DAO, and now everybody believes, wow, we have like basically a system without people interference, which is a certain set of rules running based on the set of rules. But at the end of the day, we are all humans, and you look back in thousands of years of history, and it always boils down to some failure in some set of rules you set up, right? So there, in my opinion at least, there should be always a way integrated of how can you change a set of rules if it's not working, or if it takes another way like you expected, because of course you cannot predict what it does, right? So
yeah,
it very much comes to these points.
And it's very worth to point out that the DAO is not an AI. So it doesn't make any decisions by itself. It just executes what people decide collectively.
Exactly, and there's a lot of human involvement actually in every kind of DAO, right? We discussed that with Dash in special, and I would like to come back to the point you mentioned before, like what is a good project or / ICO rating compared to a bad one, and you mentioned the point of, okay, we have like a certain set of people evaluating and then gets in a different pot. So, I mean, if I see it right, if you read articles about what is ICO rating and how can you actually for yourself rate any investments you do in an ICO or in a Dash proposal project, it usually boils down to there's quantitative criteria and there's qualitative criteria, right? So you can look at a team member and say, okay, how many projects did he make already? Is it 10? Is it 15? And if he had a good career with 15 different projects and great jobs, okay. And then the question is like, what were the great jobs? Is KPMG worth more than working in the coffee around the corner? And of course, that's like a qualitative criteria, right? So can you talk a little bit, or what is your ideas on that, and what would be good qualitative and good, or the most important quantitative and the most important qualitative criteria for what you talked about?
Yeah, there's no straight answer for that. Basically, what I've given just now was like basically two options, right? One was the peer-to-peer way, and the other one was the DAO way, and both of them would basically be decentralized, but they have very different properties in itself. So if we're talking about peer-to-peer, then it is very important for the investor side, who is interested in reading about ratings, to have a very well selection tool for who do I listen to, who do I want to listen to, right? Like, who is my rater? So, there need to be a very good selection tool, like for the rater, but then also within the raters. Let's say you select your like 5, 6, 7 raters or 10. Then you need to have a very good tool to actually sort out your way of investment out of their ratings, right? So that is, there's a lot of let's say, tool requirements involved in that. And how we solved that in BlockRate is basically that we had two set of questions that we asked within the metrics that you were talking about, like the rating metrics, basically. The one would be questions that are facts. So these are basically deep, enter the details that you can put into a system. So that would be, for example, like all the founders' LinkedIn details, for example, or how much, how many tokens are they putting out, or like a lot of parts of the token economy. So this is like facts, right? And if you are doing decentralized rating, then you already have a problem with the facts. Because if you centralize that, you get the facts from the ICO. They enter it into your website and then they are there, right? But in a decentralized way, you don't want to trust the ICO. You don't want to have anything to do with the ICO. You want to only get the data right? So, but still you need to incentivize people to actually put it in the system, right? So, anyway, we worked it out, but it's an interesting problem that you only have if you want to decentralize it, right? And then there's a second part that was the facts, and then there is basically the soft values, where we usually go on a matrix between 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, and then the raters enter their own values, and then there is some kind of guideline to every value, where we would say, like, okay, how would you evaluate this in this situation? Like, for example, like somebody worked for a different company, right, in the past. So, so these kind of evaluations can be in there. And then what we offer, and I feel that was quite an important part, is that you can, as a rater, you can add a write-up. So you can, to every individual matrix point where you put in a number, you can actually add charts, pictures, you know, any kind of intelligence that you find out about it, so that the investor, if he is later really interested, and he looks deep into the project, then he doesn't need to dig out all of that again. So he just goes into your notifications that you have with that points, and then he can have, you know, and then you have so much added value that an investor is actually interested to pay for that, right? Versus getting a free rating from somebody that maybe doesn't deliver these added intelligence.
And I have a couple of things I think about when you say that, and one is, okay, you mentioned before we don't use AI, but actually I read so many things about like what were the good ICOs in this case compared to the bad ICOs, and they gave like many criteria, right? Like now do we have a running solution? Like look back 1 year later and you can figure out many things from the past, and you can learn from this data from the past. Sasha, can you maybe press F5 and then you don't have to look at all my craziness on the crazy working style. So no, I lost it. Okay, so you can use AI in order to like gain information. This is the one side, and the other side of the same coin basically is, I mean, the more you have ratings, the more people will go for these ratings, or the more the people know the criteria which they are rated for, the more they will push their project to fit into their criteria, right? So it's like it basically sabotages itself on the long run in a way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. It's, I mean, AI is still relatively limited in that effect, because AI would run. Yeah, but it would run only efficient if you can really compare apple to apple. And in a lot of ICOs you can't, and that is actually also really the problem. I mean, not only in ICOs, in the startup world in general, right? Who would know? Who would have known that Snapchat would have made the race, right? So there are always these kind of like against the rule kind of players that suddenly break through and make it. And it's very hard to predict that or put that into some kind of metrics. And I think that is the major problem here, that you have to have a system that is open enough to welcome something that doesn't fall into the mesh, right? And I would say at the moment it is a very, very tough problem to build that decentralized, because if you build something decentralized, you want to bake it into smart contracts, and if you have it in a smart contract, it's hard to change. So yes, of course you can fork it out and things like that, but these are very difficult problems to deal with in a decentralized fashion. So eventually we would probably end up in a world where we have a rating system that has an AI element, machine learning, then you have a human rating element, and then you have a decentralized rating element. And the decentralized rating element will be then also connected to things like sentiment analysis and things like that, so social media analysis. So, and then you would probably kind of like algorithmic put that together and come out with some kind of rating from there. But it's a tough problem. And the problem is once you have done that, you have one list. And nobody can work with one list. In my opinion, if I'm an investor, I don't want to have the list of another investor, because he might have a total different investing scheme, right? He might invest into like total different things that I would believe in the future. So, so what you need is a system that answers all of that, basically.
It's always so abstract, right? I mean, we have to find the angle to really make something happen at the end of the day, and this is where we discussed that with Dash. At the end of the day, it's an incomplete system in a way, right? Because you have like discussions and you have like 150 opinions from 100 people, and all these little things involved, all these strings attached basically to every proposal we see, and you have discussions. I mean, what I have to say about Dash is I'm amazed how still to the point these discussions are, and we talked about it outside before when you had like the big piracy party movements in Europe a couple of years ago. It's like everybody talked about the liquid democracy and it's the future of things, right? And what happened is these discussions always drifted away from actually what they were discussing about in a way, right? And it was, I mean, I don't want to judge anything or would say that I know the truth, but in my opinion or my feeling, there was like one major point where it all like diffused and sabotaged itself at the end of the day, right? So it comes back to the point like Dash is a good system, people talk about the things, and again they have an incentive. This was another thing we talked about, like what kind of incentives do we have? I mean, we have the fact that you have to stake 1,000 Dash, which is a lot of money at the moment. So we have different actors in the systems, the ones who have a lot of money to pay that, who have then they have an incentive to vote, right? But I mean, of course, you have also the people who are into Dash from the beginning and they didn't put that much money, right? They were maybe just lucky to have now a couple of masternodes running because they were able to invest as early as others, right? So there's like a...
But they might be also more interested in actual governance issues than somebody who just bought it for the money.
That's a very good point. And maybe that's one reason why Dash is still working so good, because we have so many people in there, right? We're even discussing internally what are actually the master nodes, who are they, right? Because I mean, you don't know, you shouldn't probably also not know, right? It's, I mean, it's
safer.
It's an open system. But I mean, what kind of age are they? Old guys like us? Are they young people? Are they all developers? Are they from what they come, right? I mean, the more you go into these forums, the more feeling you kind of get who they are.
I think what is important for Dash in the long run is that you find a way to have the small amount of people who are actually voting, which is like, I don't know how many are voting on current proposals. Let's say we have 4,400 masternodes,
700 votes, like that.
And
7 rods, 4 or 5.
And then there's always like, I don't know, 200, 300, 400. How many voting on proposals?
Depends on the proposal, of course. But on the good ones, there are many.
So important for me.
Or the proposal people feel it's important for them. Again, then we come back to the point of do you care for the proposal?
Right. So important for me is not how much is the percentage of the people voting. What is important for me is that those people who vote, no matter how less they are, they vote basically in interest of the giant DAO. Right? So in that case, if you can find a system that makes it work, that not everybody needs to vote all the time, but you still act in the greater good's interest. And that is something that I think would be very desirable to develop. And at the moment, with like the amount of masternodes we have right now and the amount of proposals we have right now, I think it's quite well sustainable, and as you say, it runs actually pretty well. But I see also a little bit that a lot of proposals are actually kind of like proposals for yes, promoting Dash, but it's basically Dash has to pay something to an entity to promote Dash. And that's very good for adoption, but I think it would be nice if there's a system that actually incentivizes also proposals that are not directly connected with payouts for some kind of things that are happening in the real world. Maybe it's just like changes in algorithms or governance or things like that. Like, for example, let's say I think 5 Dash is a lot for proposal, right? If I would have that opinion. then I would maybe make a proposal to change 5 dash down to 1 dash or something. And if I want to do that, I still have to pay 5 dash for the proposal, but I don't get anything in the end, except that maybe they would change it down to 1 dash, right? So I personally have no incentive to actually go and make that vote, because probably the fact in the future that I will only pay 1 dash for any follow-up proposal will not make me as much money as I would lose right now to pay 5 dash for the proposal in the first place. So thinking that way would probably, you know, have a certain number of proposals not actually happening. And I believe it would be nice for Dash if there would be, you know, some thoughts into that direction to see, like, how can we actually cope with a large amount of proposals that are maybe also not so much monetary incentivized, but still for the greater good of the DAO, and obviously then always benefiting the DAO, even without potentially that spam control of 5 dash. So that would be something that I would wish for in the future. And I don't know, I have a couple of ideas how that could maybe work, but it's a bit bigger topic to talk about.
Yeah, I see people starting on their mobile phones. Guys, any questions from you?
So on the proposals that you vote on, is it a binary vote? Is it like yes or no? Or have you started to go in deeper towards more qualitative votes?
It really depends on what you want to know. Like for if we're talking about DAO rating, it could be like in a lot of cases we probably have to have entries from 0 to 100 or 0 to 1, 0 to 10 or what, right? So you basically, yeah, you have a range of entry. Then another option would be that you would say, like, for example, for the problem of data entry, the fact entry problem, right? You could do it the way that you could say, like, okay, everybody has to enter the LinkedIn profile's URL of the CEO here, right? And then basically the algorithm could see, like, what will be entered, and then it sees, like, okay, which one was entered most, and those which entered basically the majority, they would maybe get a little reward, maybe they actually would claim reputation or something, and then those which enter something wrong or a false or whatever, they would not get the reward or even get de-rewarded. So that would be also think about it.
I guess in that case, the reward is kind of a feedback loop, right? So
Good.
Is there independent question asked to be feedback on a previous decision that the DAO is making? Like how did you think the DAO did on this decision evaluating?
That would be a very interesting loop. Yeah, I think we should totally have that.
Another thing to add there, because we were mentioning now LinkedIn a couple of times, we are working with many Asian and European projects and realize there is not only one internet and there is not only LinkedIn, right? So
Right.
nobody in China, or not the majority of people we met of Chinese or Korean or Japanese people will ever have a LinkedIn profile. The same as nobody of us has WeChat or something, right? Or Kakao Messenger or whatever these systems are, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're totally right with that. What definitely also should be implemented is a reoccurring loop, because you basically you vote for an ICO, right? And then the ICO comes to a market, and then maybe later you still want to vote for it, right? Maybe something changed in the stage of the ICO, or you know, you want to reevaluate or something like that, right? Or you want to actually go through the whole life cycle of a product until it maybe even dies until the end or something. So then you have to, in circles, you have to reoccur these evaluations. Yeah.
All right, guys. Maybe one last thing we discussed before. We have some people from other communities, EOS, here in the room. Like, I mean, there's many projects, and we discussed it's kind of a trade-off. Always you have to do like who puts stake inside something, how centralized something it is, or how many people are able to vote, and who is included, who is excluded in the systems. What would you think is the way we have to go? We should go for
the way. Well, in my personal opinion, I'm not a very big fan of POS systems, exactly for the reason of centralization or attackability, let's say. I understand that, especially for certain use cases, we don't need that super high security. So we don't necessarily need proof of work, and we can work with other systems, and then obviously we gain on transaction per second and usability and all these things like what EOS now makes possible, that we can even more or less roll back blockchains if we need to. No, it's not a rollback, but rewrite. These things, I believe, will make a blockchain project actually usable in the real world. But it also makes it less a blockchain project. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I consider to put my factory or my product life cycle or whatever on the blockchain, then I would be more happy with a system like EOS, where I can actually have arbitrators, where I can have Ricardian contracts and things like that, to enforce on-chain stuff into the real world, than a system where I don't have that, right? So on the other hand, I need to ask, if you actually give so much power to 21 nodes, is it then a good idea to build your company on that thing? Right? So that is something that everybody has to reevaluate for themselves. But in the greater view, I would say the usability will be always higher rated than the security. So probably that speaks for EOS on that end.
That's an interesting, maybe finishing statement. Guys, any more questions from your side? Anything to add? Anything you always wanted to know and never dared to ask? Now is the time.
I'll just perhaps correct and ask on one thing.
Yeah.
You say the rolling back.
Yeah, it's not a rolling back.
It's not a rolling back. But
You're totally right.
Yeah, what the arbitration does, and remember it's a newly launched system, still in its infancy.
And it's not yet pre-reactive.
Right? So a lot of these criticisms, really, you have to look at what's going on deep under the hood to try and understand where it's possibly going with those things. But what they're doing is the arbitrators can freeze accounts where there's alleged thefts involved, or other, whatever the disputes may be, the arbitrators can rule on those accounts. And there is a debate and proposals that for arbitrators that can arbitrate an order, or arbitrators that can arbitrate an opinion. So they give an opinion, and then the 21 could
block producer could either go
choose.
Yeah.
So, but if it's an order, they do as they're told. And the way it's written at the moment in the terms, if you like, is that it's in order, but it's all very subjective. So it's kind of caused a bit of confusion, a bit of controversy, to say the least, in that respect. But there is a new framework that's being proposed that kind of addresses that. And it also opens up arbitration to a free market, and a free market of arbitrators, which can then go on DAP levels, and DAPs can choose which arbitration forums and so on. It creates a kind of standard, which would be very good for the business world, and certainly for large-scale DAPs and so on. But the other thing to consider there is also another thing is that the 21, it's actually more than 21, because with DPoS, it's now DPoS Byzantinium fault tolerance.
Okay.
Byzantinium.
Yeah.
Byzantinium fault BFT.
Yeah.
So DPoS BFT, which allows for more than 21 block producers. So the way it's set up now, it's 21, and anyone that can generate enough income for 100 EOS will earn as a standby block producer. Okay, so that's a variable figure, that's a variable number of standby block producers which are earning the rewards, and they're all
They
already...
earn rewards, but they don't produce blocks, right?
They don't produce blocks, but they have to be ready to produce blocks should something happen to one of the 21, so they can step in. And I think also with the BFT it allows for more than 21 if that was at some point voted in as a change.
But there, for example, I would love to see a system where we have some kind of like randomized system where the standby block producer would then randomly get in for like one block or something. So because right now it's just, I mean, for my personal view, it's very much centralized on the 21, even though they are elected.
You're right. It is being discussed, a method to bring them into test readiness of the standbys, because what could happen is, and it has happened, a standby could be voted in and
right away
get
not
ready or whatever, so that they can come straight back out. So it's a way of testing the readiness and preparedness of the standbys. But in terms of the top 21, I think, and this is one question I probably have for you regards to voting on the DAO proposals. I think there's something like, as Alec was saying, there's 17% of the token holder of the accounts voting, which is a very small turnout, and the majority of those are large stakeholders, which are perhaps within the ecosystem, running their own nodes. They want to be in the top 21s, the Bitfinex exchange, I think we mentioned, and some of the Bitcoin miners and so on. They're voting themselves in. But also, one of the things you were saying about Dash, it's you know your stakeholders, you know your master nodes. It's kind of the same thing with the top 21. These exchanges, these mining, these are known entities. These are people that are trusted. So we kind of like saying, okay, they're there, we know what's going on, but is it a bad thing really? But in the long term, how can that be improved upon and so on? And as what you
it's
said,
very much debatable. I mean, that could be at the same time an attack vector, right? I mean, if you know who they are.
Actually, in Dash, you don't know who they are, right? You can make a persona of reading a lot in the comments in Dash that you know, like, are these people rather 20 years old or 40 years old, right? But you don't know exactly who has 1,000 Dash to be a master node, right? Because
in Dash, you
so
don't know.
In EOS, of course, you know them. But there's a trade-off, right? In EOS, you know it and it has advantages, whereas in Dash, you don't know, and which has advantages on other factors, right?
Well, you're talking about security, right? Because you don't know where they know.
We talk about governance, security. It's many trade-offs, I think.
I don't get that. I mean, you know them. How is that a security risk?
You just say we talk about security, right? There's many aspects to that.
In worst case, let me just draft a very worst case scenario. It's like I want to govern the US blockchain and I take hostage the 11 wives of 21 block producers. I mean it's
More husbands.
more husbands. So no, just I mean like because they are known, it can be an attack vector.
In terms of taking out some of the top 21, we've got a number of standbys. It's probably 80 in
Sure.
total. So
Sure, but the point is not taking them out. The point is like making them vote for you, right? Or making decisions or producing blocks for you. So that is the real attack.
so it's a trust issue.
Yeah.
Right. But isn't it easier to trust a known party than an unknown party?
In the normal world, yes, but in the illegal world, it's the question. And in my opinion, we build blockchains so that we don't need to trust, right? So yeah. But again, I totally underline your call that you were saying. Like it's a lot easier for businesses. So if I am a business and I really want to know my other side, right? That is how we used to run companies until now. So for all of these mid-size, small-size, even big-size companies, it is probably quite attractive to go to a blockchain like that, where I can, if there is a big issue, if I was stolen 150 million bucks, then I can go to somebody and say like, hey, that was not intended. So is there a way to get that back, right? And
these things can be approved on, as I say,
right.
at the time.
So this is arbitration and so on. So
One of the interesting things you said with governance, there's always got to be that human factor and who changes the decision making, the governance structure, and how does it change and evolve in effect. So all of those things are in place and it's happening. It's very early stage, and for anyone who wants to get into EOS, now is a great time because it's in its infancy. It's
cheap.
there's a lot of opportunities there, and it's human. Yeah, exactly. It's very human. There's a lot of human interaction with governance systems, right? Because it's the social layer, the human layer, and the governance layer, I suppose, which are important for us. And this code is law doesn't work, which is why Dan Arrow came up with the intent of code is law.
Yeah.
So we can look at the intent through recording contracts.
That's the idea of the recording contracts.
Yeah, it's some very worthy stuff in there that is worth looking at, and it's open source. Anybody can,
Totally.
business can take it, launch their own blockchain for private enterprise. In effect, competes with Hyperledger, IBM type systems on that scale. So it's certainly worth it.
Yeah, sure. But another aspect, we talked about this yesterday, right? It's like how can you make a proposal to one of the block producers or to one of the VCs basically, right? Which is in Dash, the forum where you have a very open discussion, and that's actually what could be learning for EOS as well, right? We have Dash with the working forum, and we at least if we put the shitty proposal on, we get some feedback why, or we get no votes, right? So we can think about how can we do it better the next time. Whereas you send something to a VC, if it's something not perfect, you will probably never get any answer, right? Because they get so many proposals.
Yeah, and they have the work proposal system, but there's no referendum contracts, they can't vote on it. There is also no system to put the proposals to the vote, to the referendum, for people to go through and look. So there's all these things that need sorting out, but what's the rush? It's 6 billion worth in the work proposal fund already, and they're deciding, do we burn it? Do we
Universal income.
Universal income.
There's many, of course, but that's my point would be like everybody can learn from each other in this space, right? And there was this theorem that did so many things, right? But in my opinion, they have a big governance issue, same as the Bitcoin blockchain. Now we have EOS, we have Dash, they have kind of better angles, but of course nothing is perfect yet, and we're still trying to figure out what's the best solution.
It's evolving technology, and we can all learn from all the different systems. Ultimately, there's no one right way to do it. It's kind of
perfect. And then again, what we don't want is always having the same people in the room eating different pizzas. So we try to open up the community, bring it to the real world, all this stuff, and that's what we're here for. So if no more questions, a big applause for Martin. Thank you very much.
Thanks for all the questions and the time coming here.
Who's still excited about governance?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Good to see you guys. Hope to see you again. We're going to be here on Tuesday. As you know, Dash Tuesdays live from Bangkok.